Hi, this is Matt Slauson, and I thought I'd show you a little bit about how I made this bass saxophone crook, and I'll show you some of the things I learned along the way. So I started out by measuring the existing crook and taking information from the beat up one to try to figure out, the shape of what a good crook was. And I drew this up and did a 3D model, and then I printed this model. So once I had this printed, my dog alarm's going off. Once I printed that, I took a piece of sheet brass, and I learned from making the first couple of these that you need lots of extra material, because as you're hammering, it pulls the material in or stretches it out, and you got to shrink stuff and stretch stuff, so you need lots of extra material. So I took this and I traced it out with a magic marker, and then, I said magic marker, a Sharpie. I drilled a hole right here, I slit this, and just cut a square out with lots of extra. So you can see there's my extra. I started out by forming these ears around this round area, and then I started by working the interior, because this inside is really tough to do. And of course, I annealed this numerous times throughout the process. So I cut it, slit it, drilled a hole first, then slit it, and to start the forming. On the first one that I made, I used, normal dent hammers. The process for doing this is essentially what artists call, I believe, repoussé, which is they raise or lower the metal to create a 3D form. So I rough cut again, and then I bent this over these round parts and started just roughly hammering this together. Well, I learned right away when I did the other one that doing this inside curve is really tough. Getting this is a tight curve, and getting it bent. Now, I added to my troubles because those crooks are so thin and they're so destroyed. Maybe they're thin because people hammered and filed and sanded on them over the last 100 years. But maybe they started out thin too, who knows. The metal was about 30 thousandths of an inch thick, and I opted to use 40 thousandths because I knew I was going to hammer and sand and remove metal. So I'm probably about 35 thousandths thick in most areas on this now. So one thing I learned, again, is that this was really, really tough to do. And what I did is I took steel rods, and I hammered inside here with steel rods and dent hammers. I even made an end for one of my mallets that was rounded so I could hammer in there. And it's just really tough to do. And then I realized, they really make a tool for this, and you can buy it at Harbor Freight. So, oddly enough, this is an air hammer, and air hammers normally come with a, automotive stuff. They come with so you put this chisel, and I originally got thinking about it because I'm in the process of refurbishing a canoe, aluminum canoe, and I needed to re-rivet the rivet, put new rivets in it. So I needed something to hammer the rivets. I thought, well, I'll buy an air hammer. And then the light went on. I thought, I can use an air hammer to make this crook. So what I did was, in place of having this chisel, I made a new air hammer with a rounded end so that the air hammer could fit in here and bend that and hammer that into shape. So that actually worked out pretty well. It was a lot easier than trying to hammer with conventional means. So I hammered the 2 halves. I left it long. Once I got it shaped to the rough shapes that I wanted, the customer that has this horn had a specific OD on each of these ends. And so the way I decided to make that, because my crook that I made was a rough dimension, I took the thickness of this, the outside dimension that the customer wanted, and I made these 2 discs to fit in the end here on these ends. I'm not going to drop them in. And then I clamped them in place to hold this together. And I just kept dry fitting this together until these 2 discs worked their way to be, the correct diameter that the customer wanted for this end and this end. I am positive he will have to cut this to length and probably do a little hammering and filing himself to get this to fit, because it's a work in process. So I guess back to the air hammer thing. It's kind of interesting. So you put this on here, this goes on here, and you hook it up to your compressed air, and then you hold your brass and you just kind of hammer it in through there, and it works pretty well. So I got the 2 halves put together. Now the other thing that is problematic is you got to get these as much as possible to be equal halves and flat so that you have a tight seam. So what I used was I have a 6-inch by 48-inch belt sander, and I just held these halves against the flat on the belt sander to get them flat. And I just, it was trial, error, fit, and go from there. So I got them to fit nice and tight. They fit snugly with these 2 dies, and I hose clamped it together and silver soldered it, and a lot of filing, sanding, some tapping, hammering. Is it perfectly round? No, but it is considerably more round and heavier and structurally a lot better than the one that was on it. So that's a little bit about how I made the crook. So lots of hand hammering. I think I posted, it took me about 4 hours to do this, which it did. There's a couple of little things on the inside. It's not perfectly even on the inside either. But when something's handmade like that, there's going to be some flaws in it. So there you go.